When we do that, how awesome.
Thank
Um,
you.
Great. Well, welcome to the state level and systemic policy committee meeting. Uh, Today is September 26th. It's 4:08. Um, we before we go over the agenda, is there we do have three state board members present. Is there anything we need to do to in addition to establish a quorum?
I
No?
believe
Nope,
we
just
are
say
good.
starting the meeting
Yep,
because you have quorum.
we're good.
Great. So our meeting has been established. So our first item of business today on the agenda is the follow-up on the strategic planning discussion at the retreat. And part of the context here, Representative Goulet, is that Representative Patterson and I are going to be meeting with Ossie and Kathleen this Thursday to be able to think through what that can kind of look like. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I wanted to just kind of open things up about the strategic planning discussion that we had at the previous retreat, and if there are any lingering things on folks' mind.
Thank you. Do you want to let the co-chair go first here? Representative Patterson, do you want to start?
No,
That's the normal order here.
I'm good. Go right ahead.
All right. Well,
I appreciate that, Representative Goulet.
I appreciate you both, and I like that you two will be meeting with Ossie on this. I think it would be good to have some coordinated outreach. I mean, for me, this process has all been about trying to make sure that we provide in a dashboard in a convenient, searchable format that people can use that is user-friendly, the information that parents are looking for to make an informed choice about which schools they would send their children to, or to look, just evaluate within their own school areas that they think need to be improved. So I'm excited to partner with Ossie on this outreach. I think it's going to be really important that we're able to touch, parents throughout our city and hear from students, teachers, and administrators too on that. So I couldn't think of two better people to be leading this effort and coordinating with Ossie. I will make sure I'm at all of those sessions where we are reaching out to the public. And I just want to compliment our state board staff for, I think, what was really a useful activity at the retreat, which was passing out kind of what other states evaluate.
Exactly.
And I would hope that as part of what we do with any outreach, we create on our website, if we can, some sort of way for people to rank things that other states may evaluate, because we may be surprised at what parents say about what is useful to them, and there may be measurable data from other states that would really be useful to our parents in DC. And I would hope that we would find a way to include that in any sort of dashboard that we put out there. So I'm excited that the two of you will be working on this, and just think we had a good discussion at the retreat. I think the next step will definitely be to set some meetings with Ossie, and I'll hope to be there for all of that.
And I do want to establish, if I may, as well, is that I know we've had numerous conversations around one particular subject, which is the summative score. And I want to be clear, as I was in the meetings and every prior meeting that I've always been in, is that I understand, and what was passed during our last amendment, during our last session, was that there will be a summative score. So I'm not trying to rehash if there's going to be a summative score. When I go into the meetings with Ossie or with the community in general, I'm looking to say, okay, where does that summative score go? Not if there's going to be one. I'm not looking forward, should someone bring it up, to like, okay, can you take the summative score? Can it be out? I'm not looking for that debate. I felt that was a debate that we had over a long period of time with the last iteration of the State Board of Education before the current configuration. And so I'm not looking forward to that debate, nor will I support that debate. And I want to make that very clear, since this is a public meeting and can be followed. What I'm looking for is to find a way that will fit within the guidelines that we have established with our amendments, and also what the community wants, that best fits the community. So that is my mindset as I go into this, and I want to make that very clear as we engage Ossie over the strategic planning of these three meetings that we're supposed to have with them. And that will be my tenor throughout these conversations with the public.
Can I have second round after you speak? Second round?
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for the candor and transparency, Representative Patterson. I appreciate that. And I think to just kind of level set around the summative, and then to also touch on a couple of things that Representative Goulet had mentioned. I think the state board has done a lot of work on this issue and engaged the public with thousands of pieces of input in past iterations, and that was kind of delayed by COVID, right? So we're kind of updating from that place. So I don't want to throw out a lot of what the public has already kind of recorded on this issue. And I'm happy to continue keeping an open mind about what I think can best kind of serve our community. And with that, right, like the questions that came out of the strategic planning conversation were like, what impact do we have? And this was something that we all had talked about at the retreat and at our recent public meeting, is like, how can this tool really be used, right, by policymakers to help improve schools? And I think that's a critical piece. And then I think the other thing is that to continue the to listening to families and parents as well around what they want to be seen, and to use what other states are doing to inform that process as well. So that's something that I definitely look forward to engaging with. On the issue of the summative score, I as well want to be clear that I do think it exacerbates a lot of inequality if people don't understand that it's not a metric for school quality, right? That there's a big difference between, having a summative score that is a federal requirement, and then having that score be used to say this is a good school or this is a bad school, or this is, kind of getting into that language. I would love for us as a city to transcend that narrative, right? So that we can give parents and families all the information that they want, and realize that like this isn't to say these are good schools or bad schools. We need to make sure that we have strong schools all throughout our city, right? And so I think to have a more sophisticated, robust conversation, from what I've heard from constituents and also from teachers and policymakers, right, is that having that linked somewhere on the website, but not necessarily front and center, is what I'm hearing from constituents that can be most useful in guiding this process moving forward.
I think we're hearing the same thing, Representative Williams, is that nobody wants to have a summative score because, in the sense of it being on the front page and received as a ranking. I am with you 100%. We do not want to rank our schools. And I said this again with the last iteration of the State Board of Education when Representative Ruth Wattenberg sat with me, and with Representative Emily Gasoy. We do not want an indictment on a school that is under-resourced and they consistently receive bad stars, or scores, or rankings, or anything that they do, okay? We do not want that perception. We do not want that narrative. I live in a community where I have a number of schools that have bad narratives, Ballou, Hart, Johnson, some of the other schools, but I also know the leaders of those schools that are doing amazing work. They're doing amazing work. They're showing growth as they try to move kids toward proficiency. And I don't want something that is put on a report card that denigrates their efforts whatsoever, because that does not explain what is actually happening in that school. And I'm sure, Representative Williams, it would not reflect what you're doing in your classrooms with your students at any little snapshot. What I do, as I've always said, is want the summative score, to use it as an indicator for which schools need more support. One of the things we all know is that the bottom 5% receive additional funding from the federal government, and that's what it's kind of used for. But for those other ones that are right there, because I think we have a number of schools that are right there, they don't fall within the 5%, but they have scores that are similar to the 5%. I want to be able to use that as an indicator to say, okay, these schools are the schools that need more support. They're not bad schools. A lot of great things are happening, but they're also right there and need that type of additional support that doesn't fall within the federal guideline, but also as a city, we can start helping them to see what they need as far as resources. I explained last night to some parents that I met with, and Representative Goulet was there, that resources are important, and how we identify and get resources to schools that have been marginalized and underserved historically is important. And I hope that our report card does more of that than says, the narrative is this is a good school, this is a bad school, whatever the case may be, because I don't think that's what the report card should do, but it should be a support system. And what was also put out there was that this is a tool that we could possibly use to lobby other elected officials for additional funding and to use as an indicator. That's what I would like to use it for, whether that's around school safety or other issues that are important to parents, school culture, attendance, whatever the case may be. Those are the type of things that I would like to see this report card be used for, not to indict the efforts that are being done in each and every school that we know people are working very hard.
I appreciate that. Representative Goulet, do you want to weigh in on that before I talk again?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Representative Patterson just said there. I think when we hear from parents on this, and we had great testimony from a number of public witnesses at the last SBOE meeting, it was making sure that we don't have a ranking of schools that we don't have. I'm going to use just for example, we don't have Key listed as an 89 and then below it Hursted an 85. And that's not the way we rank schools. People want to see summative scores. It's helpful, particularly for parents who may want to make choices based on even charter schools, comparing one to another. That's a useful tool, but it's certainly not the only tool. And I know the parents in my ward have echoed to me that's not something that they really would prioritize, and certainly not above other things. I mean, for them, the overcrowding issues are front and center as an issue. The issue of whether there's pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 available at their schools is more important to them than that. The special programs, the AP programs that are offered are above, the scoring, and then just issues of safety at the schools is another issue that parents are concerned about. So having all of this presented by somebody who's, actual and visual data presentation on a dashboard, I think is useful. I think one of the witnesses even kind of described having the summative score as part of that dashboard, and that's exactly where I would be with it. So I second what Representative Patterson said. I think it's required. I think it's useful to parents, but I think we would be doing a disservice to our schools if we said the summative score is a way we're trying to rank one school above another. It's really just another piece of information that parents can use to be able to make the best choice for them and their kids.
Yeah, and I generally agree with that too. And I think what Representative Patterson, you said about certain schools, around the city, right, as an at-large member, but also in your own neighborhood is certainly similarly to how I feel about Cardozo and a lot of the great teaching and work and things that are going on there. I think that, to me, the question that I want to implore this committee to keep in mind and to engage with OSSI with is how. Right? The how are we going to ensure that schools get the support and the resources they need, right? Because to me, the report card is a what schools need support with, right? And then the next piece that we need to play in our ecosystem is the how. And I would love to engage, continue to work with OSSI on that, to hear from DCPS as to how they are going to make sure that if a school needs support with safe passage, they're getting that. I mean, I know in certain schools, even in the neighborhoods that I work in, because I'm in the schools every day, truancy is still a huge problem right now, and tardiness, and making sure that students are in school every day ready to learn. So like, how are we going to be able to get schools those supports? Because our schools are bleeding out of people in a lot of ways with regards to our human resources from the pandemic, right? Like, our turnover has not gone down as a city. And I know we'll kind of touch on that later, but I just want that to, be kind of front and center with really pushing DCPS and pushing OSSI to develop strategies that are going to be effective for our families. So the next thing, are there any additional kind of comments or thoughts around the strategic planning piece before we kind of move on to the committee run session for the fall engagement?
Just lastly, on this will be my last point, is I think, after we have the discussion with OSSI, with the two of you leading this effort for the board, I think what would be helpful to me is that after we get a dashboard prepared and we kind of get a draft of the way we want to present this data, is that we do a test run with parents. We see what they think about it, and just some folks walk through it to see if that's something that actually works for them. So just keeping the parents involved. I know we're going to have extensive community meetings on this, and I'm really excited to kind of see what you guys come up with working with OSSI, what that that community rollout is going to look like. So I'll be there for it, and just want to thank you, Representative Williams and Patterson, for leading the charge on that as part of this committee.
I appreciate that, Representative Glenn. I think that's a great segue into the fall engagement event, because I think so much of this is theoretical in its planning stages. And until we actually have a website, right, or a draft to be able to use to engage the public, like people are just going to be kind of wondering certain things. And, you know, even as a teacher, right, like if we're going through an essay, you know, I could talk about everything that makes a great essay, but until we actually look at an essay and critique it and, you know, and try to give suggestions and feedback about what it looks like, the actual essay itself doesn't improve. You know, so one thing for me that feels important with that, and something that you know, I can commit to bringing up with Aussie on Thursday when we meet, is just kind of more of their timeline of when they plan to have a draft done. Because I would love for, you know, not to delay the work of the state board, but to make it most effective, to have that draft of the report card, or the dashboard rather, created, so that we can take that to an engagement session to ask people what they think, what they would like to see changed, what they really appreciate. You know, and I think that would be best, rather than planning an engagement session before that's created.
But I just want to clarify that there's sort of two separate engagement things on the agenda. So the first one is like the SBOE fall engagement event, where each of the committees is responsible for planning one of the sessions. And so we can decide if what the topic is, could be the report card, could be retention, could be something else. And like the session's goals and outcomes, and then the activities we're going to use. And then we can also talk about the joint engagement with Aussie, which I think is what you were talking about just now. And so we're planning like our fall engagement session for the SBOE, and then also the joint one. And so I think there's questions for both of those.
And I think at the last meeting, and feel free to weigh in to Representative Goulet or Kathleen if you have thoughts on this, like I had the date that had kind of been proposed for that, the tentatively, was more so like November, December. Was that correct?
For the SBOE one?
For the SBOE retreat.
Yes. So I think the tentative, I think the date we're looking at is November 18th. But it's sort of flexible as we try to like nail down a location.
Okay.
To host the event.
I would recommend,
yeah,
just from a teacher perspective, or like, you know, that the push right before Thanksgiving can be a hectic time. And so I'm wondering if we might have turnout kind of promoting it like the first week back from Thanksgiving, as opposed to right before. But I mean, it's a wonder. I don't know, Representative Goulet, if you have any thoughts on that.
You know, I'm flexible on it. I think we just got to have a couple of platforms, maybe one virtual platform and then one in person. So I think if we can get the in-person one done before Thanksgiving, that would be beneficial, because I know when you start to get into the holiday season and the weather starts to take a downturn, attendance will dip at these things sometimes. So maybe trying to get that in while the weather's still pleasant would be good, the in-person one, and then we go virtual later. But I mean, the main thing I want to try to see is if we can get something that's like a polling thing on the website, where we can then direct folks to be able to let you put their opinions, rank order things that we feel are used by other states, to see if that's something useful for parents, and then leave a spot where people can leave their own suggestions about factors that they think would be important for parents to see in evaluating the effectiveness of the school. And that should go on the dashboard. It won't obviously be in the summative store, but I think that's all helpful. So in terms of the schedule, I'm flexible. I just know after Thanksgiving, in-person meetings that aren't holiday events tend to sometimes lag in attendance. So whatever we can do to make it available for more people, I'm on board with.
I think part of the proposed decision to make it before Thanksgiving is that like the state board and Aussie will be trying to kind of wrap up the report carding, like more like finalizing decisions like in December. And so if we were like having that engagement and hearing all those ideas like in December at an event, that it would be harder for us to implement those changes.
Right.
So if we
So
can get
Kathleen,
it,
you're thinking November, we need to get these things done then pre-Thanksgiving probably?
that is the date that Brittany suggested was the 18th.
Okay, great. That works.
And I think that, yeah, just to kind of, I like to sometimes think big picture about this. So like after meeting with Aussie on Thursday, one of our goals of Thursday's meeting is to identify dates for the shared collaboration on the report card. So I think we can have a better sense of how the state board engagement fits in with that at the latter end of this week.
And I think we can still think about today, sort of like, do we want that engagement session that the committee is going to run to be about the report card? Is that like the issue that we would like it to be about? It seems like that is what people are saying, but there are other things that the state board works on.
Right.
And so it's totally up to the committee to decide, but I think like having at least that idea would be helpful. Since like the next time the committee meets will be like significantly closer to that event.
Yeah, I think I need to give it a little more thought before weighing in more firmly. But I could see I think part of my thinking I think will be influenced by how the conversation with Aussie goes on Thursday. Representative Galea, are you okay if we move into the collaboration on report card with Aussie?
Absolutely. Let's keep rolling.
All right. So on that topic, there were a variety of things that we're considering. One of them, Aussie has shared with us that their goal is to have 3 different sessions. We're talking about what the potential format could look like. They've proposed 1 in-person event and 2 virtual sessions as the format for the 3 different ones. Each of the formats would have a different topic. And so those would vary, and that's up for discussion later on this week. They were also kind of thinking about what that they would create certain overviews, like the 1-pager on what the summative score means. And we're wondering if the SBOE would like to take the lead in crafting any additional materials that we think might be helpful for the public. So at this time, I'm just going to kind of open things up to hear our thoughts around, format suggestions, but also if there's additional kind of materials or resources that we feel like we need to pay special attention to.
I just want to highlight that one of the committee's budget requests was for like flyers or 1-pagers around the report card. So there is money to do like professional printing or like translation or other things like that is set aside for the committee in our budget.
Wonderful.
I mean, I think you summed it up well. I just want to make sure that, there's not an A side or B side agency. Both agencies get equal time, that, it's clearly a co-managed process, and that, the things you've proposed make sense. I mean, we just got to try to make sure people attend, and having a virtual plus an in-person event, I would, emphasize the need to try to reach out to communities in the in-person event that, are probably less likely to have equitable access to technology, to make sure we've really got a representative group of people weighing in on what they want to see for summative scores. So I'm sure I know you'll be on top of that. So I just trust the process that you and Representative Patterson will work out, and I'll be there. You tell me when the meetings are, I'll be there for them.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're happy to keep you in the loop with that. And we'll I think for me, the primary concern that I have right now, I like the collaboration with Aussie, and I think that it can help generate more public involvement more broadly. And thank you so much, Kathleen, for your detailed suggestions to the survey. and getting those back, in a timely manner. However, the section on the summative score in the survey, in my view, does not reflect what Representative Patterson, myself and you have said here today, Representative Goulet. So like, I want to make sure that in order to get good data, and based off of our previous public meeting, making sure that we're asking questions that are accessible and understandable for the public so that when they're answering these survey questions, they're giving us reliable information. There is a ranking question, that shows like a school, from 0 to 100 that to me does not meet the spirit of what we're intending to do. And so, how we use that, right, is within our purview, and how we make meaning of that and how much weight we give it. But I do want to kind of make sure that our role as the public's voice in education is to educate the public on what that score means and be clear that it's not a metric for school quality, right? It is a federal requirement that we have to make sure that we meet by as a state agency. But like, so that's my only concern so far with the collaboration with OSSI, but I wanted to make sure that, you, Kathleen, and Representative Patterson are clear on that so that, as we're doing sessions, we can make sure that we're gathering information that's necessary. And then if we need to come up with another set of questions around the summative score, then we can do that to make sure that we're getting the information and the right pulse check from the public that will help us make decisions about where and how it's placed, before we vote on approval.
And I think you're spot on right about that. I mean, I'll make my point of view really clear on it. Hopefully my dogs aren't barking in the background here. I don't want to see a list of schools with summative scores, like almost like a, listed from 100 down to whatever the lowest would be. I think doesn't give a fair representation of it. I also don't want to see like with the school's name and then a big number in a circle at the top or something like that. I think that's not what we're looking for. But I also don't want to have the summative score, which I do feel, is one useful metric potentially, but, understanding that you got to, look at resources, you got to look at issues that could be affecting that school, like poverty. It is a useful score in terms of comparing, similarly placed schools, and parents do use it, but it's only one metric. And it's not necessarily the most useful metric. It's one metric of many that parents may use. So I also don't want to hide it in a way where you've got to click on a couple of links just to get to it. I want it to be, on the dashboard, but not in a way that draws unnecessary attention to it. But also I don't want to hide it either. So I think I kind of fall somewhere in the middle on this, of thinking that it's useful to have that federal score up there, but in a way that's not giving it unnecessary weight. I want people to be able to see it, though, who may be looking at that as a metric they would follow, just like I would, for things like school overcrowding, like whether they have pre-K 3 or 4, I would want those things to be featured as well. So I guess it's going to be, on how it's designed, how it's presented, and I think where we are on it, and we'd just like to see it portrayed in a way that gives it the really the weight that it deserves, which is not necessarily above any other factor, but not trying to hide something that is useful to parents. Because I think this should be about transparency also, and that is one factor parents are interested in. So we've got to be transparent about that.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, and that's like, I agree with what you said at the beginning of your statement. I disagree towards the end, and I want to be clear on that as well. I think that conflating it with just another metric to evaluate schools is not what the majority of my constituents want, and is not something that serves the purposes of school improvement. So especially because the metric is predominantly test scores and a small factor of attendance, and doesn't have a significant weighting of growth or what schools can actually control. I'm of the mindset that there should be a button that people should click, that if they would like to see it, it's one click away. But in terms of the things, that schools can control, like, supporting teachers or school safety surveys, or what program and extracurricular things are offered, those are far more important to me than a metric that has been tied to, exacerbate inequality in our city, and gives a false and misleading metric for how good or effective a school is. So and we could see how that plays out and also inform things by the public's input throughout the rest of our engagement. Are there any other things that you or Kathleen or Representative Patterson would like to flag for us at this point before we go into our collaboration meetings with OSSI?
That's you got it covered.
I mean, if you like you plural, think that you would like to produce some additional materials to support engagement, it would be good to start thinking about like what purpose those would serve in addition to the ones that OSSI has proposed, because the P code of the purchase order process is not fast. And so if we want them for a meeting that's coming up, we have to plan further in advance. So if there is something that is not been proposed by OSSI, captured in their worksheets, we can do that. Is there additional information that you think is not in the two things that they proposed?
And what was the second one that you're referencing there, Kathleen?
Just look at it. A one or two pager that describes what content are federally required, and then a one pager about how the summative score is calculated.
Yeah, I think another overview of if I go to I'm just talking with people who don't have any background knowledge on this, I think an overview might be helpful, right? Why do states create these? I mean, essentially, it's an accountability system, right? And I think the states that do it best are the ones that are doing it as a way of learning how their schools are doing, and then taking action steps after this tool is created to support schools. So I think helping the the public, help educate the public that this is not just an evaluative tool, but it's a tool for school improvement, is important, because then it's oh, what do you want to see how we're doing on, so you can see how we can improve, and that in that sense, it's like a data gathering tool, to be able to make sure that we're measuring what we care about.
Yeah, Kathleen, I have an idea here, and you guys may have already done this over there at the state board, but what would be really helpful for me is you all have looked, you did your analysis across the states, but I would be interested to hear from you, maybe not right now, later, on kind of what you think are the top, 3 to 5 states that do this well. Like when you look at these dashboards, what do you think people have done well with, and then we can model, because that gives us a good starting point rather than trying to reinvent the wheel on this, and we can find. We can steal the best idea from the best state that has the best dashboard and then try to improve upon it with better data or something like that. So somebody's got to have done a really good job on this already. So I'd be not asking you to share the opinion now on it, but I would love to hear from you and the team at the state board, just to hear kind of what your thoughts are on who's doing this well, and then how we can not only port that over to DC, but then how we can make it even better. So that would be something that would be really helpful to me.
And that would be just information for you all, not something that would necessarily be a paper that we are going to be handing out to.
Oh yeah, I'm just talking generally. Okay. I completely changed the subject there. I was just
okay. I just want to make sure.
Get your top 3, top 5 on what you think are the best states. What's looking good to you, and then then we can kind of have that as our baseline, and we try to do better on what they're doing. And we can even share with parents, and I can say, hey, here's 3 states that our staff identified are fantastic with their dashboards. How can we make this better? And that gives people a chance to look at something, really kind of conceptualize what we're talking about, and then go for it. Because for me, the summative score is just a small component of this. There's a lot more data that I want to get on there that, the parents in my ward have stressed is important to them. So that's what we should have on there, so people can really get a holistic evaluation of, what the schools are offering.
All right, thank you both for that. With no further sub issues on the collaboration with OSSI, I'm going to move us into teacher retention. So Representative Goulet, this is an issue that is kind of near and dear to my heart, both as like a teacher and currently, and having seen a lot of educators lead and a lot of the organizing work that I had done prior to being elected to the state board. So I still feel like our city, I don't feel our city is still in a dire need with being able to change some of our inputs if we're going to be able to change the outputs of retaining good teachers. And Kathleen, I don't know if there's an update yet, but I know that there's been some talk about the council holding a hearing on this topic in late October, maybe early November. They haven't chosen a date yet. And so what I would like to do is kind of see how the state board staff, how we can look at the crosswalk proposal that is being generated, and then make some recommendations as well from our committee if we can agree on some things that we think would help to promote retention. I know you've talked about this a lot, and we've had other conversations about this too. But to really then be able to weigh in on that citywide conversation, later this fall or early this winter. And to do that, I think effectively, I think we just need to be clear on what we think will help most with keeping teachers in the classroom. Kathleen, do you know if there's an update yet around when we'll be able to see the teacher retention crosswalk?
I don't, I mean, I think it's almost done, but I don't know exactly. I can check with Jen on like the timing and stuff. But I think during the last meeting, the committee had also suggested that there are like things to do in the interim around looking at like existing research that the state board had done in the past, that other organizations had done, other like scholarly work that is related to DC's teacher retention issues, and kind of getting an understanding of the landscape. I think we're not super specific about how the committee was going to go about doing that. And so in terms of like the strategy, if there's a way that you would like to look at some of that research that has been done and make sure that we're all like on the same page about that, that might be useful, because previous it was kind of like, we're going to do it, but then there wasn't a plan for how that was.
Are there any thoughts about how best to do this work collaboratively? Because I feel like, with regards, there was some talk with, of, starting to kind of get feelers out with DCPS to see if, they would have the willingness to kind of have a task force to look at how to revise impact, or to look at, evaluation systems across the charter LEAs. But I'm curious kind of what others' thoughts are on maybe the best approach at this point.
And if I may, and I know I'm jumping in kind of like after being away for a few minutes. As we look at impact, have we thought, and that's the subject matter we're talking about, the revamping of impact, is that correct? The evaluation system itself, right?
More broadly, just like how to support and curb the exodus of teachers, like that being one piece of that conversation.
Okay. Yeah. I'm very open to working with, whether it's the teachers union directly, Empower Ed, those folks who are really invested and been doing the work for quite some time, and that we get to engage on a regular basis, and it seems to be are highly supported by our teacher constituency. And so I'm very open to engage in those groups, and I think they're wonderful groups to talk to kind of get insight on, and then what type of direction we should be taking, how to support them best to kind of mirror that. The biggest thing that I want to make sure that we also do, because and I don't know if you were having this discussion while I was away for a few minutes. It seems to be we don't engage charter teachers on the same level as we engage DCPS teachers, because they do have the WTU, which is easy to engage. I do think there are a number of them that are part of Empower Ed, but I just want to make sure we have equity in there, because I think there's a lot to be learned from both sides. We have over 106 LEAs in the city or something like that, or our schools, let me say that, different schools and stuff like that. And so just want to make sure we're getting a well-rounded and representation from teachers about that.
So I don't want to cut you off, Representative Patterson, but yeah, I mean, the impact system, for me, I think we are too inflexible in trying to sit down each year and make tweaks to it that could improve the system. And I would love to hear from the teacher community what they think needs to be changed. I think it would be great if we could have a discussion about how we make just small changes to impact or whatever system we select each year to make it better, rather than have it be an all or nothing thing that kind of comes up as a every so often is something where people feel if they don't get something from it now, they're just losing an opportunity to reopen it for years. It would be good if there could be more collaboration on that. So yeah, I definitely support that. I mean, there's three other issues though for me that I think rise above it, and I want to kind of go through what those are, and one that I want to try to take some immediate action on. I was at I'm blanking on it. It was the block party, the DCPS kickoff block party. I had an opportunity to talk to the teachers union there, and I'm just really troubled by the lack of progress on the teachers union contract. And I think you had even mentioned it down here, Kathleen, in the comments too. So you were having a mind meld on that, because that for me is a huge issue. And for me, the deadline's not even the fiscal year, which starts October 1st. It actually is around December 31st, around the start of the year, because what we need to do is not just get the contract passed, we need to get it included in the budget. So when the budget, is released on a school by school level, like January, February, and then released citywide in March, the contract for the fiscal year you're proposing the budget on should already be signed, and the funding for it should be in the budget. So I feel like even though we erased 4 years of non-agreements, we're still 9 months behind right now, and we're going to get further behind. So, I'm going to propose to put a resolution up. I want to see if we can all co-introduce it to the degree possible. We did this, but we did it after 4 years last time to put pressure on them, because this is, to me, the number one issue. The reason schools got cut last year was because we were trying to make up for basically 4 years worth of inflation. And even though there was a large increase proposed to the overall school budget, it resulted in 5% effective cuts to many of the schools in my ward. I mean, parents were apoplectic about it across the ward. I got 1,000 emails on it. And, we can't get back in this hole again. So, I'd like to see like a 2 to 5 year agreement that the DCPS works out, something that will not only cover the fiscal year we're going into, but then at least the next one for the budget that's coming up. So I'd love to work with you guys on that resolution, because I think having stability in the contract is really, really important, making sure we keep pace with inflation for the wages and that we get that type of stability. So I'm going to definitely push for that, and I'll get you a draft of it hopefully by the end of the week. It's something I want to work on quickly. The other thing that I think is really important.
I'm sorry, can I just super briefly? So the WT contract is for 3 years, but because the last one took so long to approve, it was 3 years from when the previous contract expired.
Correct.
So that's why it's being renewed now. But the one that is
Plus
next
the
approved
current
should
year.
be 3 years from that.
That's
So
correct.
it's not supposed to be just 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. It's just because that's how far behind we were.
It was
Yeah,
3
that's
retro
correct.
years, and then we did FY23, but FY24 doesn't have a contract coming up, and the FY24 budget's already gone by. So we need to not only get it in the FY24 budget, we don't want the FY25 budget to pass without the contract being funded in that, because the problem that happens is then mid-year it's difficult, for the mayor to find funds unless revenue goes up. It's hard to get contracts certified after the budget's gone by, because we're in a tighter economy right now. So we really need to put this number one on the list of priorities for the upcoming budget cycle. And the way you do that is you get a contract in place, before the budget comes down, so we don't end up getting back in a hole again, which is hard to dig out of once you get 4 years behind. So I'm I'm definitely second what you said, Kathleen, and I'm excited to work on this and get a resolution up that we can have at the next working session.
And I'm supportive of this as well, Representative Goulet, for the simple fact that we've talked about it, a lot about ESSER money going away and everything. And a lot of things that we were able to do was because we had that federal funding. We could kind of manipulate a lot of school budgets based on those ESSER fundings that was there. There was a lot of additional FTEs that were brought there. But now that we're at the end of that, this is the last year and stuff like that, we need to be very intentional about how we're looking at what teachers are going to need, what was highlighted during that period coming out of COVID that was funded, and to make sure that they're receiving an adequate, a very fair salary to make sure, because they're going to lose resources as well. And I'm with you, Representative Goulet, in saying the sooner the better we can have this discussion, the sooner the better that we can push folks to settle on their new contract and everything. I am 100% supportive of that. I am a father of a teacher. So I feel you every time they call me, and they say, Dad, I need some extra funds because things are running out, because it's hard being a teacher in the District of Columbia or in the DMV period. And so I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
I just want to name that I'm in full support of that too, Representative Goulet, and I'm happy to kind of collaborate in the drafting of that with you if you want to share a document with me. Yeah. I'm meeting with a couple Washington Teachers Union teachers later this week to kind of get a deeper understanding of where they think that stands. And then I would love to be able to support that immediately, so that like you said, the timing of solidifying the contract before the budget comes out makes perfect kind of sense to me as to how things are. So I would love to be supportive of that, because even as we saw, right, with regards to teacher increases, like what helps teachers in DCPS is also helping teachers in charter schools. And so I don't think this needs to be an us versus them type of situation.
Agreed. 100%.
You mentioned that there were two other things. So you were bringing up the contract, and then what else came to mind?
So the two other things I have, one is just generally we need to make sure we're providing adequate funding to the schools. Part of that's through our adequacy study, making sure we have the right amount for those weights, but then also that we just budget the money for these schools. Because in my ward, the thing people mention to me over and over again is burnout. And you're seeing a lot of teacher burnout from the overcrowding. And overcrowding is partly how many kids you can stick in the school, but then it's also how many teachers you can hire to serve those kids. I mean, we had to shift at Hardy to, it was 90-minute class periods last year. We're down to 82 minutes this year, but that's still too long. It's because we simply don't have enough teachers hired at the school. I mean, I've heard issues heard a lot from our teachers at was Jackson Reed, with the class sizes being a big problem there, and at Deal as well. So those are places where if a teacher's got to have a class of 40 to 45 kids, you can't maintain discipline in the classroom. It's difficult to keep up with the workload. And then because you don't have enough teachers hired throughout the school, you're then asked to give up planning periods to be able to cover just basic functions of trying to keep the school orderly. That's a problem. So we need to be able to up the UPSFF numbers in this year's budget so we can hire more teachers. So it's all kind of connected. You need to pay the teachers, and then you need to have the money budgeted in the schools to hire more of them, so we can actually not have teachers burning out, because we're in kind of a downward spiral on that right now. The last thing I would mention on is just housing. Anything we can do to try to incentivize housing for teachers here in the city. I know Maryland has a really good program on this. We may want to look at something like that, where the city gives a down payment, where we pay the down payment, we help with that, and then we forgive the amount the city paid based on years of service. So let's say the city covers the down payment, and if the person decides to sell, the city would immediately recoup that money. But let's say over a 20-year term of service, that's forgiven, and then the person then can be in our community. There's so much value to having our teachers being able to live in our communities here, and it should be something we're incentivizing above a lot of other housing priorities that we've previously worked on. I mean, getting teachers in DC, to me, should be right at the top.
Thank you. All of that I think is work that can live and be supported in this committee. Representative Patterson, do you want, or Kathleen, do you want to weigh in on anything before we kind of move into new business?
I think it would be useful for the community to kind of identify some next steps on the teacher retention issue, because we're kind of trying to think strategically about, like, it sounds like there's an understanding of the impact that the committee wants to have, but what steps can we start to
Yeah.
take to get
Something
there,
that
I think will be helpful to articulate.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think to me, what comes to mind, and you know, colleagues, feel free to weigh in. Or one, like, I'm happy to support Representative Goulet with drafting a resolution on the WTU contract so that we can be clear about supporting WTU's teachers in this upcoming budget cycle. I think two, to me, is you know, for for a resolution around an exploratory kind of, I'll know more after a meeting on Thursday, but essentially an exploratory task force or something that kind of brings together principals, teachers, and other maybe thought partners around improving evaluation systems. So I'm thinking about a resolution, hopefully in November on that, that can coincide with the hearings on the council. And those are two things that come to mind for me, and I'm open to other ideas as well.
So, Representative Patterson, do you want to go first, or would you like me to?
You can go right ahead because
great.
I don't have any new business or
Yeah.
on the things that we've talked about. Because I'm always trying to be conscious as well as I look at Kathleen and all the wonderful work that our staff do, is not to overburden them. I know that we have a very small but very capable and powerful team, but I want to always be conscious of how much work we put on them. So I have no new business, or as we get ready to go into new business. And on the things that we have discussed, I'm supportive.
Yeah. So in terms of next steps, Kathleen, I think that's a great question. For me, for each of the things I identified, I do have next steps that I would have in mind. So I mean, I think we like the council can't control the mayor's negotiations with union. That's purely within the purview of the executive branch, but we can highlight the issue. I've heard rumors the council may do a letter. We can certainly do a resolution, and just to emphasize how important that is that we get this done for the fiscal year coming up, and then at least the next one, so that we can get that in the budget. The next step also then for me is making sure that we have a budget process that makes sense this year. Last year, it was just kind of mass confusion. I don't think the LSATs felt they were involved in the process at all. So what I would like to do is I would like to get our Attorney General to, first of all, get involved. He needs to kind of engage on this. There's a Schools First in Budgeting Act that there was a lot of question about last year. I know I felt it wasn't legally sufficient. It was proposed by the council. The executive branch ignored it. And I think getting him to weigh in, that's why we have an independent AG, would be really helpful on this, to see whether or not that's something the mayor needs to follow, because that would then really be instructive of how this process goes. So that to me is one step that's important. The other step is I would like to see the council adjust its budget timeline to push the submission of the budget back in time. There's no reason it needs to come in early March anymore. That was a product of the old days when we needed to get congressional approval of our budget before Congress went on recess. I would like to see the February revenue estimate come out, then give the mayor a couple of weeks to decide upon what the individual local school budgets are when they can see the full revenue picture, so we don't have to be overly conservative. And then a couple more weeks after that to then get the whole budget out. So, I mean, getting the budget out sometime in April still gives the council its full time to get it approved before the council goes on recess. So I think that's important, to get a process that just makes sense and is a lot more transparent for our LSATs to be able to participate in. And then we got to just do advocacy. I mean, I think this is a product of all our members. I'm going to be putting this first because I said this at the meeting last night with PAVE, and it holds true to me, is that the city's budget is shrinking. It is shrinking dramatically, and we don't have the revenue to do all things. Everybody's got a lot of great ideas out there, but for me, education should be right at the top of the list. It always was for me. We were able to fund it during the recession as we saw our city's revenue shrink, but it's got to be number one, because not everybody's going to eat in this line. People are going to be eating at the buffet, but the buffets run out of food. So whoever gets there first is going to get a full plate, and then everybody else may have an empty plate. So I want schools to have a full plate, even when times are tough. So that's what we got to do, is advocate, advocate, advocate. And then lastly, on the housing side, I think that's an issue for a bill. I think it's something this committee could get involved with. We actually have the power to introduce legislation. So we could, after doing a lot of work in committee on this, we could come up with some housing incentives, looking at other jurisdictions, and then maybe propose legislation that hopefully the council would consider and mark up and include in the budget coming up, because I think that could be very impactful.
When you speak of housing, in particular, Representative Goulet, are we speaking about teachers' housing?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. I would want to restrict it in this case. I think it would be beneficial for other people in our city as well, other government officials, like certainly police, certainly our first responders and our FAMS. I'm thinking about our transit workforce too. I think all of those would be beneficial. We got to really rebuild a middle class here in DC, and I think offering enhanced housing incentives to some of our workers, like our childcare workers, like people who we want living in our city, I think is really important, because we've lost our middle class. But I think for the purpose of this, if we're introducing legislation, we got to stick to kind of what's in our statutory realm, which would be education. So I would probably focus on teachers. Maybe we could get into childcare workforce as well, but then maybe others could emulate that to all the other professionals in our city who could benefit from a program like this.
And as a budgeter, I appreciate that. And I asked the question, Representative Goulet, for the simple fact that when I first ran in 2020, and I continuously bring this up, and as I consistently say that I'm a parent of a teacher, and I know that is one of her biggest issues, is being able to be a teacher and live in this area. Unfortunately, she cannot afford hardly anything in DC to buy or anything like that. So she gets to stay with me most of the time. But saying all of that, I say this, that I have proposed over and over again, and I would like to see some more investigation into it. I was a military member. We had a housing allowance, period, point blank, for being a military member. It was an amount of money that was added to our checks that was tax-free, actually. So when I moved to the District of Columbia, when I first got here in '95, I was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, and I wanted to buy my first house in Southeast. I was able to do that because we have a housing allowance, which gave me enough money. At that particular time, I believe I got $900 added to my check. This is '95, of course. That actually almost paid my whole mortgage, was able to buy a house, pay my mortgage. And then the fact that it was not taxed, but that housing allowance and how that's done for military members is something that I've always wanted to see if that's possible for our teachers. As we know, this is one of the most expensive areas that there is to live in the nation. We got a housing allowance for the simple fact that as service members move from area to area, the housing costs varied. And so it varied in very different regions, everything like that. But adding a housing allowance or something, an incentive that makes it possible for a teacher to come to the District of Columbia, be able to afford a house where they're not stacked on top of each other, 3 and 4 teachers living in one apartment because they want to, teach in the District of Columbia, or even come back to the place that raised them, and come back and teach because they were raised here and now have become teachers. That's a very important thing. And I would love to see how we could help teachers out with something similar to that, or some type of idea that it makes housing affordable for our teachers.
I would love to work with you on that. I mean, just to add one last point on it is, we did look at this issue when I was on working for Vince Gray on the issue of trying to get our first responders to be closer to the city in case of emergency. One thing we looked at for that was doing basically waive those professions from DC income tax. So you would benefit only those who choose to live in the city. And that could be a pretty substantial amount of funds. I'm not sure it would be quite enough that we need to do, but if, let's say we did that for our teachers, that if you live in the city, you're going to have free income tax. It starts to then make up for a cost of living difference from Maryland and Virginia. And we could try to quantify what that would be, and if it would be enough to kind of be something similar to what you proposed, for military families. But I would be 100% on board with working with you on that, and it's an exciting topic. So I look forward to following your lead on that, Representative Patterson, and trying to get something, maybe a resolution out with some legislation attached in the new year here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both, and I'm supportive of that work as well. I want to move us into new business before we adjourn. I do not have any new business items. Do either of you?
I do not.
Sorry, I actually have a new business item. One of the other members, Representative Henderson, suggested to me last week that we could have one of the upcoming public meeting panels be about the financial literacy standards, so either like November or December. And that is something that kind of sits with the committee, so I wanted to raise that as like discussions.
Since that is a topic for OSSI, and I know there are a number of members who are watching us probably today from the office of at OSSI. I'm open to that. And what you're saying, Kathleen, is that he would like to have a panel to talk about it a little bit more in depth and everything like that, coming off of their briefing on it.
Yes. So the timeline that OSSI proposed when we spoke about it, I guess it was just past working session.
Did he propose a month that he would like to have that in, seeing that we have these things that are coming up with the report card and everything first? I know, we want to be sequenced in who we have panels and the work that they're doing at the same time.
Yes. He didn't say a specific month, but I think I suggested like November or December, since we have October already planned, because OSSI said that they were planning to release a draft, like a first draft for public comment at the end of November or the beginning of December. Yeah. And so either like just before or just after they were released might be a good time to hear from experts on the subject.
Well, I'm supportive as long as we sequence it out, to kind of correlate with what they're doing and the release of things that they're doing. And also that it falls behind basically what we have to do with the report card, so as not to overburden any particular office. But I'm very supportive.
Yeah, I echo that too. I think sequencing is the critical factor for me. So if we could ask OSSI for greater clarity on when we'll get the draft, and then similar to what Representative Goulet had said about getting public feedback on the report card, I think it's best when we have something tangible that people can weigh in on. So my general thought is to, kind of sequence it after we have a draft, but with enough time before an approval vote and with time for them to make, changes and iterations to it. Thank you, Kathleen. Any other items, Kathleen, on your end?
Do we have an update on the AI roundtable? I know you were just discussing it with Representative Best, but I wasn't sure what the status of it was.
Well, he had originally floated a late September idea to me. I had told him that he was welcome to come to the committee meeting if he wanted to pitch any particulars on it. I think the idea was to just continue with a roundtable as opposed to a panel. He has my full support, and I've been able to connect him with a couple people that I thought would be able to serve on that panel. But if we wanted to quickly, just to kind of Representative Goulet or Patterson, do you have any? I guess simply put, like, are you okay with him continuing to organize that roundtable with committee approval?
Yes,
I am. I know I'm not the AI expert or anything like that. I'm just trying to kind of learn. So knowing him personally and his interest in AI, yes, I'm very comfortable.
Yeah, I'm supportive as well. And again, I will echo that I'm not the AI expert either on this. So we'll let someone who is take the lead on it. That sounds good.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you all. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
Awesome. Appreciate it. To all those tuning in, thank you. And I will see you all at our working session the first Wednesday of October.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.